Welcome to the Wellness Rebel Show, where you reclaim your health and tap into your body's healing power. I'm your host, Fatima, here to empower you with the knowledge and tools to take charge of your well-being. Whether you want to boost energy, improve mindset, or unlock vitality, this is your go-to source for practical advice and inspiration. It's time to step into your power and live a life of health and freedom. Welcome to the revolution. Welcome back to the Wellness Rebel Show. Today I have Jana Danielson. She's a Pilates instructor with a specialty in pelvic floor fitness and metabolic health. Welcome, Jana.
Thanks, Fatima. And I love the disruptive energy of the rebel. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you here. So let's start off with your journey. Why did you choose this profession or this passion, and why pelvic floor fitness and metabolic health?
Yeah. I actually felt like it chose me because when I graduated from, I grew up in a small town. I was, a farm girl and was leaving my little town of 500 people to go to the big city of 300,000 to go to university, which doesn't seem like a big population for some of you listeners, I'm sure. But I did my business degree. I did an undergraduate degree in business. I did a master's degree in business because my goal was to bust through this glass ceiling and be like the first female CEO of fill in the blank corporation. And through my grade 12 year and into my 4 years of my undergrad, as a, firstborn Capricorn, very driven personality, wanted to, excelling was always, at the top of my list. I started to notice in my body some changes and this pain in my gut that I thought was just a nervous stomach when I went to write a big exam or play, some sort of a big sporting event. But this every once in a while pain when I went to university started turning into more, it was more regular. And then before I knew it, it was daily. And so back then, growing up in a small town, you knew your doctor. Everyone knew the doctor. You went to the doctor's office and you walked across the street with your prescription to the drugstore, and everybody knew each other. And so by the time I was 21 years old, I actually had 11 different medications that I would take every single day. And I tell the story like the last thing I saw before I went to bed was the 11 bottles of meds on my nightstand. And the first thing I saw in the morning was the 11 bottles of meds on my nightstand. So what I know now about energy and frequency, and can you imagine the fight or flight that my body was consistently in when that's the last thing it saw and the first thing it saw in my day? And so there were never any answers. There were always just more questions and more tests. And so I went to my doctor one day. I was planning on what does the next 6 months look like? Who am I going to see? Which tests am I going to do? And she actually opened my file. And just as quickly as she opened it, she closed it. And she looked at me right in the eyes. And she said, Jana, on behalf of your medical team, we believe this pain is in your head and that you're seeking attention, and have a nice life. And she stood up and walked out. And I sat there and made my way very quickly to my vehicle, where I burst into tears because I was finishing up my degree. My high school sweetheart had just proposed to me. We wanted to have a family. Growing up in an entrepreneurial family, down the road after my big corporate career, I wanted to have my own business. And all of these hopes for my future felt like they could never be achieved. And I started to question, was this some sick joke? Did I, why, God, did I pull the short straw? What did I do, in a past life? Why did I have all this pain that no one could figure it out? And I went into a very deep, dark place for about 6 months. And I actually saw Madonna on the cover of a fitness magazine 6 months after that appointment. The word Pilates was on the cover of that magazine. And for some reason, I bought the magazine and I read this article about this form of movement that was like medicine. That's what it said. It said it's like medicine. It creates alignment. It creates, these spinal movements will give you longevity. And I thought, and I was teaching fitness to pay for my tuition. So I thought, well, the pictures kind of looked like yoga, maybe a little bit like Tai Chi. So I thought, well, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to be really good at it. I can boot camp and cycle like the best of them. I'll be able to lay on a mat and breathe and get this alignment in my body. Well, the first class, after about 30 seconds, I realized that if I wasn't in the front of the class in the middle of that first row, I would have rolled up my mat and left because I couldn't breathe like anyone else was breathing. I couldn't move like anyone else was moving. And I was in that moment, I, and it's a harsh word, but I actually hated my body. I was so disappointed by it. I didn't want to live in it anymore. And after that class, my instructor walked up to me and she wrapped her arms around me. I burst into tears, and all she said was, "Come back on Thursday." So I came back Thursday and I went back twice a week for that 4 month session. And, at the end of that 4 month session, I was off all my medication. I had no idea how breathing and moving and, just this concept of Pilates could heal me when a almost 4 year journey through pokes and drinking stuff and, scans had no answers. And so when I said it chose me, that's what I mean. I felt this calling to learn more. I was super curious, like, how did my body change so rapidly, and heal? And that was kind of the start of it for me. I got certified in Pilates only to teach out of my basement as a hobby. Well, that lasted about 18 months because after 18 months, I was teaching 16 mat classes out of my home. I bought a reformer, was teaching private sessions. So I opened my first studio in 2010, expanded to a Pilates studio and an integrated health therapies clinic in 2015, grew that team to 60 clinicians like chiro, physio, massage, mental health services, nutrition services, Reiki reflexology, and Pilates. So we had these beautiful practitioners that believed that the body has this innate knowing on how to heal. It just sometimes needs a reminder or a little hug or a little nudge. And that's what that business did. I grew that business for 12 years. I created the Cooch Ball, which we will talk more about, but this is why I got so intrigued with pelvic floor health from a women's perspective, because the pain that I was experiencing in my gut in my early 20s, it didn't stay in my gut. It resonated through my whole body. So I was 21, but I felt 81. My joints hurt. It was hard for me to move. I had chronic headaches. And I also started having incontinence. So at 21 years old, I would cough or sneeze or laugh, and I would pee my pants. And like I said, I was teaching fitness at that point, and I was like, what is happening? I didn't just have a baby. I'm not in perimenopause. What is happening here? And so as I started learning more about the body, pelvic floor health, and then that led me into the metabolic health realm, just really spoke to me because I feel like women are not properly educated about their body. 90% of us can heal from pelvic floor dysfunction, and it really is movement. So, that's my story and how I got to where I am today.
That is that is an incredible journey. That's amazing. And I was about to say too, I was like, how did you sneeze and pee and you didn't even have kids yet? But so you just
Yeah.
said that, like, yeah, it's crazy. So did you ever find out why you were having, like, that gut issue that was
Yeah.
affecting your pelvic floor and all that stuff?
So, I never got it like as a fill in the blank diagnosis, like this is what you have or had. But what I know about the body now is I believe that because I had so much pain in my body, and those of you that have lived with pain, you know that if it extends beyond a couple of days, you start to respond, right? So for me, I was in this rounded posture because I was protecting myself from the pain. It was gut pain, right? So I was closing
Yeah.
myself off. Energetically, my heart was closed. I was protecting everything around my pelvis because of this lower abdominal pain. So, guess what? When we're in pain, sometimes unconsciously or subconsciously, we hold. We hold tension to protect, right? And as soon as we do that, our body is so brilliant. We have this nervous system, right? And there's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So I was literally feeding my sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, freeze. I was feeding that part of me the story that we're in danger, alert, be careful, watch out, right? And so
Yeah.
obviously, my cortisol must have been through the roof as a 19, 20, and 21-year-old. That's a stress hormone, right? My noradrenaline was probably through the roof. My oxytocin, which is that love, hormone, was probably very low. I was moving my body because I was a fitness instructor. So I was exercising, but I wasn't truly having this a beautiful relationship with my body on, how does this joint move? It was like, can I get another sandbag on my low back while I hold this plank so my ego can feel really good, but my back feels like it's going to crack in half, right? So it was very much a shift for me. And so that's what I think I was. I feel like I was in this trauma response for many, many years. And my body had to trust, I had to trust it. She had to trust me that healing was possible. And once I started moving, and guess what? Once I started diaphragmatically breathing, which we can talk more about, I'm taking in 600% more oxygen. I'm tapping into my parasympathetic. I'm opening my heart. I'm being a little vulnerable. My body's like, oh, you mean we're not protecting all the time? We get to open up and love. So it really was the physicalness of my peeing my pants, of my joint pain, of my gut pain, those physical pain points, I believe wholeheartedly were rooted in emotion that was stuck, in energy that was stuck, and in this disconnect from, a higher power, or the frustration with that higher power for why me, right? I had to leave that victim persona behind. And once I reframed it and was like, you know what? This is happening to me, or this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. And what if there are other women like me that I can help them through my experience? All those women that fall through the cracks, all those women that settle for a life that is less juicy than they deserve, that became my purpose and my passion.
You're speaking my language, all those words. No, because a lot of times I really believe that, you know, sometimes the energy or the emotional piece is missing in someone's
Mm,
healing journey, right? Or they're very resistant to dealing with those emotions, and then also they get gaslighted, and so they're just like, oh, this is just my life now, right? Like they lose hope, they stop seeing that light at the end of the tunnel where there's something so much better. But sometimes it's really just a mindset shift. It's dealing with emotion and energy that got stuck there that you didn't deal with. And I know that's scary, right? Like I had a guest here say, you can deal with that later. Let's help the physical be able to have
mm,
that energy to deal with the emotions that we held, that our body held on to because it was just protecting us,
yeah,
right? Or yeah,
yeah.
right? So, but yeah. So, let's talk about, so you just basically, you did Pilates, you did, the proper breathing, the alignment,
Hmm.
and that led to healing. Once you discovered that, is that when you're like the the point where you're like, I want to look into pelvic floor fitness and its connection to like all, like, the symptoms or however it
Yeah.
manifests in our body?
Yeah, what really was kind of the moment for me, because I mean, here's what a lot of women don't realize is that when we talk about, oh, I got to strengthen my core, right? We hear that a lot. I got to strengthen my core. We think that it means laying on a mat and doing sit-ups or crunches or maybe getting into a plank to strengthen the core. But what the core really is, it's not this front part of our torso. The core is actually a three-dimensional cylindrical system. So the roof of our core is our diaphragm, our main muscle of respiration. Okay. So for those of you who are actually watching this versus just listening, I'm just showing with my hands. So the diaphragm sits here in the rib cage, and the diaphragm is like an open umbrella or a mushroom cap. It's a big dome. All right. The floor of the core are the 14 muscles of the pelvic floor. So you've got this one big solid umbrella muscle at the top, and these 14 small muscles that make up this beautiful hammock that's your pelvic floor. And then The walls of the core are this 360-degree cylindrical shape that is made up by your four abdominals, okay? The rectus abs on the outside, the six pack, right? The internal and external obliques that make together, they make like an X. We call them a sling system. So when we reach down to pick up our purse or when we, throw a ball to our kids, those are our obliques. And then deepest to that is what I call the queen of the core. Her name is the transverse abdominis. This muscle is like a corset, okay? She starts in the low back and she wraps around to the front and she's very deep, so deepest to our organs. So this cylinder, this core structure is it responds to how we sleep, what we eat, how we stand, how we sit. And the unfortunate piece is that the six pack muscle gets all the attention, right? We've been told for years that if you're fit, if you're in shape, you're going to have this definition in this muscle. But you know what, ladies? The reality is, from a functional perspective, the six pack does the least amount of work for us. The six pack stands us up after we tie our shoe. The six pack helps sit us up and lays us down in bed at night. So from a functional perspective, it doesn't do very much. So as a Pilates instructor, I started to think more about the core. Like when you teach people to breathe, the pelvic floor will move in response to the diaphragm. So pelvic floor was always a part of my teaching until one day I was at a conference in Phoenix and a urogynecologist from Reno, Nevada, so maybe not that far from you, he was presenting his research. He had just done research. This was like 2014. And his research showed he looked at 2,000 women and he wanted to know what were the top 10 exercises that help to contract or work, but then relax the pelvic floor. So he looked at Pilates exercises, movements from yoga, personal training. And what he found was that the top two exercises were the lunge and the squat. So functionally, sitting down on the toilet or sitting down for dinner, the squat, walking up and down stairs, more of a lunge type movement. And then the other 8 to round out the top 10 were 8 exercises from the Pilates mat repertoire. And I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? And then he said to me, well, it felt like he was speaking to me. He started talking more about the findings of the research. And he said to me, or I keep thinking I was the only one in the room, but there were other women. He said what his research found was that 90% of women with pelvic floor dysfunction, whether it was coughing, sneezing, laughing, and peeing their pants like I did, whether it was generalized pelvic floor pain, pain during intercourse, and then there's other things like constipation is often tied to a tight pelvic floor, chronically tight hips, cold tingly feet. Like we don't think of some of these. Yeah. And he said in his research, he said 90% of pelvic floor dysfunction is not a medical issue. It is a fitness issue. You know, Fatima, as soon as he said that, it was like the heavens opened and I was like, what? 90% of pelvic floor dysfunction is a fitness issue. And I'm a Pilates instructor that teaches breathing and alignment and posture. And so all of a sudden, it was like that statement gave me permission to think bigger, to think that I could have a bigger impact, because I'm not a pelvic floor physical therapist. I'm not an OBGYN or a urogynecologist, right? And that's what I thought many women needed to truly fix these issues. Now we're seeing that it's actually movement, it's poor breathing, it's poor posture, and Kegels, right? Let's talk about that. What have we been told? Like, just do your Kegels and you won't pee your pants anymore. Well, actually, in about 70% of women, our 14 muscles of the pelvic floor are already too tight. We call them hypertonic. So guess what Kegels do? When you think about squeezing and releasing, in 7 out of 10 women that are already hypertonic, we're making those muscles that are already too tight more tight. So you do your Kegels, you're still peeing your pants, and then we think, I got to do more Kegels because it's not, I'm not doing them enough. And we're actually causing almost more disruption than healing, right? So knowing where you are on the spectrum of too tight versus lacking tone is super important, but no one talks about this, right? We
Yeah.
just do Kegels and think so that's what really became like, I drew my line in the sand and I was like, okay, wait a minute. If I can actually help 9 out of 10 women by learning them how to breathe properly, how to move properly, how to stand properly, my biggest gap in my how do I do this was I didn't have a tool to bring oxygen rich, nutrient rich blood flow to that area without sending someone over to my clinic to the pelvic floor physical therapist. So that's when I created the Cooch Ball. I was like, there's a problem to solve here. Let me create something. And that's what really got kind of my, no pun intended, but juices flowing around
Yeah.
pelvic floor health, because it's an area that we just don't talk about. We pretend it doesn't happen. It's just something that women go through after they've had a baby or in
Right.
menopause. So I just got to suck it up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of taboo surrounding that, even just like about, you know, libido and sex and all that stuff. But it's funny. I was going to ask you that question about Kegels because so with my first, I had a home birth attempt, but I was in labor for 3 days and I had to transfer. I ended up having a C-section. And then I was thinking about it. I was like, you know, like researching, like, why did that happen? Why did the baby get stuck?
Yes.
All these things. And I was like, oh, maybe I was so tight down there because I was doing, you know, like yoga and all the stuff and the Kegels, right? So on my
Yeah.
second, I was so determined to have a VBAC. So I did prenatal aquatics classes. And every time the instructor says, okay, it's time to do Kegels, I just stood there and I didn't do it because I was like, nope, not, I'm going to have this
Yeah.
baby through my vagina. No Kegels.
So did you?
Yeah,
Amazing.
I had an accidental home birth with my second actually. Cuz I was very stubborn. I was like, "No, I'm not going to go to the hospital yet cuz I don't want to I was going to have a VBAC at the hospital, but I was like, maybe this will be like the first one. I don't want to end up having a
Mm.
C-section. Go to sleep." I told my husband, "Go to sleep. I'll be out here so you can rest. Take me to the hospital tomorrow." And he came out at around midnight and my water bag was already hanging out. And I was like, he's like, "Are you going to walk to the truck?" I'm like, heck no, I don't even know what's hanging out there. And how am I going to sit in the truck with
Yeah.
something hanging out? Right.
So
So,
did you
yeah.
so what did your husband
he,
deliver him?
yeah, he caught the baby.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. I wanted to have a home birth, you know, originally anyways. But I had to compromise with my husband because the nearest hospital to us had a VBAC ban because they didn't have a 24-hour anesthesiologist. So
Ah,
I compromised but yeah, I did 300 squats a day, but no Kegels.
no Kegels. That a girl. Good job. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's funny how, like you said, like they just tell you do Kegels and you won't pee
Mhm.
or, you know, so
Yeah.
I love
Well,
that
you
you
know, the other
mentioned
thing
that.
that well, but the other thing that women, I think another kind of myth is that we need to bust or we should bust or I want to bust is that a tight muscle does not equal a strong muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
A
Yeah,
strong muscle knows when to work and it knows when to rest. A tight muscle is just tight all the
right.
time and it
Yeah.
doesn't know how to relax, right? And so that's why for most women that are like a rock wall, as soon as there's extra intra-abdominal pressure from a laugh or a cough or a sneeze,
Mm,
because there's so much tightness, that extra inter-abdominal pressure just goes down and it hits that tight muscle and the muscle can't hold anymore because it's been holding and holding and holding. So that's when that's where the incontinence happens. Whereas if we had a healthy muscle, it would like respond to the
yeah.
coughing and the sneezing, right? It would move in response to that extra pressure and be able to manage it without there being any incontinence. So for most women, they do need to do a pelvic floor release, which oftentimes is done fabulously internally by a pelvic floor physical therapist. Sometimes there's just like in your shoulder, you can have trigger points that they have to go in and release. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same exact thing when it comes to the pelvic floor.
Okay. I was also going to say, I'm like, it's just like a healthy nervous system. It's
Yes.
flexible, right? We need
Yes.
flexibility, not just like they're tight.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah. So let's touch on, like I mentioned, I heard you say that, you know, like speaking of the energy and frequencies, that
Mhm.
pelvic floor is usually connected to shame. let's touch
Yeah.
on that because
Okay.
I was
Let's
really
touch on that.
interested in that.
Okay. So, where this comes from is the main nerve that runs from our brain to the pelvic floor. And this is in a woman's body and in a man's body. All right. So the main nerve that runs from the brain to the pelvic floor is called the pudendal nerve. All right. This nerve has a big job. Well, actually, it's got two jobs. It's a motor nerve. So it sends messages to and from. For example, when you have to go to the bathroom and you sit on the toilet, it'll be the nerve from your brain that's like, we have to, empty our bladder. So you'll go and you'll sit on the toilet and your pelvic floor will relax so that you can pee. All right. So that's an example of the motor response. It's also a sensory nerve. So some nerves are just motor nerves, some are just sensory nerves, but this one does both. So sensory meaning the entire spectrum of feelings from pain to pleasure also run through this nerve, right? So, you know, the pain of being in labor, the pudendal nerve would be involved in that. The pleasure of intercourse, it'll also run through that. So this is where I kind of geek out on a few things when it comes to like the body and energy, and one of the things that I love to dive into is language, like the words that we use. And when you think of in elementary school, we would have spelling tests so we could learn how to spell. Well, if you look at the word spell, like from a magical perspective, or
Yeah.
words actually can put a spell on us, right?
Oh
Like
yeah. Yeah.
think about the word like I need when I was thinking about my kids, like boys, I need you to clean your room. Well, do I need that? Like, I'm going to wake up in the morning if their room is still messy, or do I want them to? Or boys, I'd like to invite you to clean your room, right?
Yeah.
So when I googled this, I was talking to another woman in the pelvic floor space, and we were talking about the pudendal nerve, and she said to me, Google the Latin root of pudendal. And so I was like, okay. So I went and Googled the Latin root of pudendal. So the definition of pudendal is an area of shame. And it was one of those like mic drop moments for me because in that split second, everything made sense. The why behind, why don't we talk about this part of our body to our best friends, our moms, our doctors, right? Because we think we're the only one going through it. We're shameful about this area. But yet, let's take a step back and let's look at this part of our body. Like I have my little pelvis here. So like this part of the body in for a woman is where life begins. Like we carry our babies. They are, if possible, naturally, they come out our body through the pelvis. Like what is shameful about that? Like there is such a beautiful creation energy in this part of our body. And so there's this big tug of war happening for women that we don't talk about it. We don't realize that it's shrouded in shame. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a lot of trauma that we hold in the pelvic floor, sexual trauma. There could be even a slip and fall, a motor vehicle accident, a sporting injury. Girls, I mean, as we in our teenage years, we're developing, right? We're getting curves. And a lot of us will hide that for
Hmm.
the first little bit, right? Because it's shameful, it's embarrassing, right? Or at least that's what it was like when I was growing up. So oh, oh my gosh. Okay, there. I thought I had a little moment where you just went off my. Oh, isn't that funny? What is the anyways, so that's the one piece that I would love to kind of scream from the rooftops is that knowledge is power, right? And when we understand that there is this energy, I mean, in this part of our body is also our sacral chakra, that sacral energy center. That energy center is about sensuality and creativity right? And that can kind of get shut, well, not kind of, it can get shut down. So in those moments where maybe you're trying to write something or create something and you just feel like you're up against this wall that you can't, are having trouble breaking through, sometimes all it takes is moving away from wherever you are, taking some deep breaths, connecting into your pelvic floor, sending love, right? That's all very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you mentioned that sacral area because I kind of, I'm into human design as well. And so you know how they have like I'm a sacral generator, and
Yes.
I feel like, like the way we are raised can impede your ability to be able to listen to that intuition because it gets, you know, like it gets silent basically. And we really have to remember that our bodies have a really strong intuition. But yeah, the way we're raised, or our experiences growing up in life kind of, I don't know, like dims, is the right word to say, like dims our intuition, and we just
Yes.
have to reconnect to our bodies. And like you said in the beginning, our bodies have an innate ability to heal, right? I That is one of my messages, and that's why, with the Wellness Rebel show, it's like I we empower women and other humans, whoever's listening, that you can take back and take control of your health. Like, we need to
Mm-hmm.
stop giving away that power, right? Like, who cares what the diagnosis is? It's your body telling you that there's a
Yeah.
disconnect, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
disconnected. We just have to reconnect.
It's trusting, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
trusting that when you said this, the phrase, we give away our power. We do. And I know that's for in my case in particular, I gave the power to the white scope or the white
Mm-hmm.
coat and the stethoscope, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what I believed. And it wasn't until I actually went inside to have that conversation with my body through movement and breathing, right? Like I couldn't, that first class, I couldn't breathe. I mean, that's the first thing we do when we're born. And that's the last thing we do before we leave this planet. And I couldn't do it. And what I've seen in so many women now over 30 years of working with them is that our breath, in a lot of us, it gets stuck right here in the collarbone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we actually never get to that beautiful diaphragm, which creates freedom, which creates movement. And again, going into that beautiful nervous system, as soon as we become collarbone breathers or chest breathers, that is a message to the brain that we're in danger. So, like you said earlier in the show, the body's only doing its job, it's protecting us. But what if we could shift from survive to thrive? We all deserve that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's the thoughts we think, it's the words we say, it's how we breathe, it's getting off our phones 90 minutes before we go to bed so we can have good sleep. It's now I'm kind of switching into my metabolic health.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it's getting our feet on the grass, it's getting into that morning sunlight, all of those basic things. And the body, even though we didn't come with like an owner's manual or a user's manual,
Yeah.
you referred to it. That's our intuition. We did come with this, and we actually know more than we give ourselves credit for because that prefrontal cortex, that CEO of our brain, wants to make us feel like, are you sure? Are you sure? Maybe you should Google that. And you're like, no, but this is what I felt last time, right? So, like Dr. Joe Dispenza says, our thoughts are the language of our mind, but our feelings are the language of our body. So, what if we allowed our body to feel more, think less? I feel that would serve us in a much better way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Think less. Because now, you know how in this day and age, functional medicine is getting more and more popular. And so everyone wants to do all these functional lab tasks because they want to know, right?
Yeah,
But then it's
yes.
like, to me, it's like the more you know, but then you're gonna be more stressed because you're like, oh, now I have this, I have this. It's like, why do you need to have a label for, you know, your symptoms? Why do we need to know a diagnosis? I know that
Yeah.
sometimes people feel like they need it because of the validation. Like, now I understand why I'm feeling this way, right? But we always tend to forget, like you mentioned, like metabolic health, connecting back to nature. Let's touch on that because I also teach that in
Yeah.
my program and all that stuff. So let's
Yeah.
talk more about that.
Okay. So, I became really obsessed with metabolic health a couple of years ago, simply from a movement perspective. So, I used my cooch ball and the scooch ball to create this concept called terrain fitness because our body is a garden, right? And I connected with one of my now friends, Dr. Nasha Winters, who is a naturopathic oncologist. And she said to me, Jana, this work that you're doing with terrain in the body, that's exactly, from a movement perspective, that's exactly what metabolic health is about. It's, the body's systems and, are they working optimally to be able to serve, the person at their highest, kind of in their highest form. And so I really started thinking about metabolic health in a different way, in that, yes, diaphragmatic breathing doesn't just, it's not just something you do in a Pilates class or in a yoga class, but when we take in oxygen, I said it earlier, right, through the nose in a diaphragmatic breath, our cells are now getting 600% more oxygen. 600, okay? So what does that mean? Well, if metabolism is, if we define it as the body's ability to take energy from food and convert it into energy for our cells, wouldn't we want cells that are like excited and ready to receive this nutrition so that they can then absorb it and then they can send it out to all the other, organs and tissues? And the answer is the I feel like over the past 30 years, health has been shrouded in this. It's very expensive to be healthy. It takes a lot of time to be healthy. It can sometimes be really, challenging. There's so much you have to do. And we've been conditioned to just, let's just take, I have a headache. Well, let me walk to my medicine cabinet and let me take that over the counter pain medication instead of taking a step back and being like, okay, that's interesting. How has my water intake been over this week, right? Because if, guess what? If I have a headache and I know that there's this hydration pyramid, that my brain is the first organ to get hydrated, my vital organs are the second to get hydrated, and the muscles and joints and fascia are the third. If I have a headache because I'm dehydrated in my brain, guess what? My heart's dehydrated, my liver's dehydrated, my, maybe my elbow is bothering me. Well, I'm not going to be able to heal that elbow if I've got no hydration, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it all really plugs into this concept of metabolic health. It's so much more than just I have a high metabolism when I'm young and it slows down when I'm older, right? And then, that helped me understand more about how is the body, we have these two fuel systems. We have, the glucose or the sugar as fuel, and then we have fat as fuel. And why do we get stuck in this sugar as fuel system? And it's so hard to get into using fat as fuel. So, from a movement perspective, super simple things like if you could go for a 10-minute walk after your one or two biggest meals of the day, when you eat your food, the pancreas calls on the insulin like a moving company. Hey, can you bring me some cardboard boxes? I got a bunch of stuff to pack up here. And that stuff is your glucose, right? So here comes the moving truck, aka your insulin, all these cardboard boxes, and they start to pack the glucose. They first put it into your liver, right? Then they put it into your muscles, and anything left over gets stored as fat. Well, did you know that when you go for a 10-minute walk, within 90 minutes of a meal, you can lower that blood glucose spike, by 15, 20% just by a 10-minute walk, because now your muscles are going to be absorbing that glucose and they don't have to be put into those cardboard boxes to store later. When we move, actually it's like sending a text to the mitochondria of our cells, the powerhouses of our cells, that we want them to get ready to do their work, right? So that's the beautiful kind of connection between movement and metabolism. And that's also where we can kind of get lost, because what happens when we're tired? We don't want to move. I'd rather just lay on the couch, right? I
Yeah,
would rather
yeah,
just lay on the couch. So now there's no movement. Your mitochondria aren't getting that message that, you know, there's no movement required. So they're not going to be, sending out and creating more energy. So you can also start, you can also use it in that opposite way, that way that keeps us choosing the couch over a 10-minute walk, right? I feel like there's this momentum being built around metabolic health that people are now starting to realize that, like I just explained, that 10-minute walk after dinner, getting out in natural sunlight within the first 30 minutes of waking to help. You're doing that so that you have a good night's sleep. Like you're starting to set your circadian rhythm with that blue light in the morning, the amber light in the afternoon. Like I said, breathing. Not only is it great for your cells, but you're now tapping into your parasympathetic nervous system, that rest, that digest, right? So when we start taking these little gems of metabolic health and we start bringing them together, it's like they amplify themselves. And I feel like that's how we're going to shift. The last research study I saw was that 93% of North Americans are metabolically unhealthy,
Oh, it increased.
right?
It used to be 88%.
Yes. Well, yeah. And I mean, and this was the latest that I saw from Dr. Casey Means. I saw her speaking,
Yeah.
and I
Wow.
was using the 88%. So, if we flip the switch on that, 7% of people are metabolically healthy. Like, here's the thing, we can look at it and be really sad and almost disgusted by that, or we can look at it and say, look at all the opportunity we have to start to shift that needle, to help
Yeah.
people understand, right, that getting into sunlight, getting breath, getting water, getting good sleep, like these are the basics, and that it's how we really tie back into really connecting with that owner's manual that we talked about earlier. I believe that it's less than 10% of disease is genetic, right?
Yeah.
So that means 90% of disease is not genetic. We can't
Yep.
blame anybody for it. It means
Right.
we have control over it, right? And we
Yeah.
can be empowered. And maybe that mountain looks like, how do I even start? Well, one step at
Yep.
a time, right? And maybe this
Exactly.
week, listening to this podcast, maybe you just get curious about, oh, I didn't realize that my brain is the first thing that gets hydrated, right? Maybe it's knowing that when you take a big breath in through your nose, you're taking in 600% more oxygen. When you can start to tie these actions, and I call these actions in rituals. So in my community, my women, we call them in rituals because they're like the superheroes of habits. When you
Right.
start to bring these little nuggets in, you get huge returns on your investment. And in fact, there was a University of Pittsburgh study that said for every 1 minute of movement that you have in your day, you get back 7 minutes of life. You get 7 extra minutes tacked on to your life. I'm not a big, investment banker, but even I know that that's a good return. If I spend 1 minute exercising and I get 7 minutes more in
Right.
my life,
Yeah.
that is going to motivate me, right? And so it is just, it's a reframe on the simplicity of health versus sometimes what I think is like this fashion show of making sure I've got a matching legging and bra top to go to my class, and right, how much did you sweat today in your cycle class? I would love, to kind of help women reframe that it's the ease and the simplicity that if you lean into, your body is going to respond in a beautiful way.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, here's the problem right now. I mean, we can see it as an opportunity as well, but there's so much noise on the internet and all these sparkly objects, right? Biohacking tools, do this, do that. It's like, and then when they feel like, oh, it's now they say, oh, it's too expensive. Being healthy is for the rich. No, there's nature.
Yes.
Go outside because we've been, like we live inside a box under artificial LED blue lights. Then we go into our car, drive to work under LEDs or maybe fluorescent lights, right? We're in this like capsule to capsule to capsule, we're not getting the proper exposure to nature, which we should be getting, right? We're not getting
Hmm.
in touch with nature. And that's like I feel like it's like the biggest thing that can move the needle, although it might take longer. But like you said, you need to create, that it's like do small things at a time and it compounds. It's compounding interest.
It is
Right?
compounding interest, right? It is. One of the things I learned about the brain is that the brain actually loves chaos. So if I were to look at these palms behind me, my brain loves that because it wants to organize it. All right. Think about what our homes are. They are, symmetrical walls. We might put our pictures symmetrical on the wall. Like everything is symmetrical, right? And so even looking out your window during a day where you're like really hunkering down maybe on your computer just to get a different perspective, to give your brain a little bit of a break instead of looking at everything that's all so lined up, that can actually start to erase some of that fatigue that you feel because we're just not changing up our daily routines enough to take
Yeah.
in some of this chaos that's behind me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I always say there's beauty in imperfection.
Yeah.
I always say that.
Yes. Well, you're right. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah. There was a question. Oh yeah. I was like, there was a question in my mind, it went away, but now it's back. So, would you say that? So, I have a bunch of clients, women. Usually, when we give birth, we get that what is it called?
Diastasis
Yeah,
recti.
diastasis recti.
Yeah.
So, would the first step be like to deal with that, like working with a pelvic floor therapist, or does it depend on how severe the issue
Hmm.
is and all that stuff?
Yeah. So just for your listeners, so diastasis recti is again from that six pack muscle. Because you're, this baby, this beautiful baby is growing inside of you, it does put a lot of force on that, the elastic part of the muscle. And so for some women, that muscle will actually weaken. For some, it separates. For some, the separation is quite, the magnitude is quite a lot. And so I remember actually, so our boys are 19, 21, and 24, but when they were young, I would actually have friends that would like cross their fingers and hope for major diastasis because I'm originally from Canada and our health care system would pay for a tummy tuck for them, which essentially was what the surgery is that they would do to repair the diastasis, right? And they would
Yeah.
just pray that they had enough separation in that. And I was like, you girls, you don't know like long term what this does, right? Like this isn't like you won the door prize at a bake
Right.
sale, right? So here's the thing is that diastasis at certain degrees can be improved upon. Will that muscle ever go back to its original connectivity? Maybe, but probably not exactly. So the first thing I tell all of my brand new moms is, sometimes you have to wait 6 weeks, obviously, until, your flow comes to an end, or if there's a C-section, it's obviously a little bit longer. But no matter what kind of delivery, you can actually start doing diaphragmatic breathing as soon as that baby is born, right? Because you're going to start signaling to your body, like when you breathe through your diaphragm, the transverse abdominals. So when you inhale, we breathe into our waistband, and when we exhale, we narrow through the waistband, right? And so we start to send that messaging to the body that there's more space in there, this baby is no longer there, and we actually start to send that message to the your question about pelvic floor therapy, 1,000,000%. I think every woman, like I go once a year to my pelvic floor physical therapist, just like it's one of the people that I see on my health team every single year. And, sometimes it's as simple as like 2 years ago when I went to see her, I had so when we have, when the pelvic floor becomes dysfunctional, the pelvic organs, our uterus, our bladder, our rectum can start to descend, all right? And those organs can become prolapsed. So prolapse, there's like think of like a continuum, grade 1 or level 1 through grade 4 or level 4. So level 4 means there is an organ that is now descended through the vaginal opening and is outside of your body. All right. A grade 3 would be one of those organs has come to the opening of the vaginal opening, but has not descended through it. A grade 2 means that there is some, it has started descending, and then grade 1, it's not in its, I don't want to say normal, but it's not in the place where it should be. Okay, there's this descension. A level 2 and a level 1 can be absolutely fixed. So that's why I think whether it's a new mom or any woman, pelvic floor physical therapy should be on your list because they can go in, they can do the assessment, get a sense of what's going on in your pelvic floor. For a lot of moms, activating those transverse abs is really challenging. So a lot of us think we're breathing with the transverse abs, but we're actually using our glutes. So we'll squeeze our glutes and we'll release our glutes instead of actually using the abdominals like a big accordion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're not activating the transverse abdominis, which is that queen of the core, that superficial muscle, the rectus abs that has the diastasis, it needs the support from the transverse abs to actually start to heal. So pelvic floor therapy, yes. Pilates, yes. Those kinds of exercises that really teach that beautiful breath work is what I usually put at the top of my list for my new moms, because what happens is then I get moms that are like, my youngest is 10 years old and look, like I can sink my fingers 2 knuckles in to the separation of my
Yeah.
abdominals, right? And over time that creates a lot of back pain because the body, it has partners. So when there's when you've been compromised at the front, it's going to put a lot more strain and requirements on your low back. And
Yeah.
that's how we can start to see this chronic low back stuff, which can turn into chronic sciatica as we age or plantar fasciitis, right? It's all systems that impact each other. So yeah, diastasis can be improved upon 100%. And the sooner you can start, the
Yeah.
better it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a list or a directory of amazing pelvic floor therapists?
Oh, let me tell you. I mean, and you said a really key word there. Amazing, right? So let's talk about this. So to answer your question, I have a very good friend. Her name is Marcella Hill. Her whole community is called Wake Her Up. So she started by getting a directory of hormone therapists, right, for women in perimenopause and menopause. She just called me like before the holidays and she's like, listen, I want to do the same thing for pelvic floor therapists. Can we? So we are working on it. We are working on it. But here's what I have to say is that not not all pelvic floor therapists, just like not all Pilates instructors, not all health coaches, not all
Hmm.
doctors are created equal.
Yeah.
And this relationship is one that take some time, have a conversation with them. What kinds of treatments do? When do you do the internal on the first one? Do you? And actually on my, if someone listening is like, I didn't even realize there was a specialty in pelvic floor physical therapy. There is. And actually on my YouTube channel, when I went to my pelvic floor therapist about 6 months ago, I actually recorded the whole session with her. And so you can go and you can see what my experience was like, the questions she asks. We're not like, we don't have the camera angle like when she's up in my business, but you'll at least be able to see what
Yeah.
Chelsea was doing and how, so that if you find someone in your area, you could kind of use that as a baseline, right?
Yeah.
To be able
Yeah.
to ask the right questions. So the directory is coming, but until then, do your due diligence. And because, like anything, I have heard some not so great stories, and then it just
Yeah.
turns women off, right? So do a little bit of extra pre work, find someone that really resonates. And you know what? Talk to your friend. Like, there's a very good chance that someone in your friend group has done this, but they're just like muted about it
Yeah.
because they don't want anyone to know. And you can maybe be the champion for women's health in your friend group to start the conversation, because that is what I'm hopeful that we can start to change.
Yeah, that is totally also the key is asking questions. A lot of people, we tend to research, before we buy a car or, like big purchases, we like research the heck out of it. But then when it comes to providers, we're just like, oh, first provider really close to me. I'm going to go there.
Totally. Yeah. Who has space and how far are they from my house, right?
Right.
Yeah, I
Who
I
can see
agree.
me the earliest?
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
it's true.
right? Yeah. We need to it's going back to, taking back your power. You hire them, you get to interview them, right? So you know that they're the right fit, that your energy matches and all that stuff.
Well, and that, one of my favorite questions that I've coached women on with other health providers is the question, help me understand that, right? Because if they're telling you something, I'll have women come to me and they'll be like, the doctor says I have a bulging disc at L4, L5. They'll have no idea what they're saying, but they're
Yeah.
just using the words that their doctor told them. So a very basic way to frame a question is like, help me understand that, okay? We are we are intelligent beings, especially about our body. And if that provider cannot connect the dots for you, they're not the right fit. We should not be left to feel like we aren't smart enough to know what they're seeing in our body or what this treatment
Yeah.
should be. Ask questions. You the driver of this bus. So
Yep.
you should be with people that really empower you to learn more about your body.
Yeah. I also know that there's a lot of doctors out there that when you start asking questions, they get mad. So that means they're not the right provider for you.
Is that not a red flag? A hundred
Yeah.
percent, right? Like
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, I think it's part of this shift that's coming in that, taking back some of that. Well, I mean, it truly it truly is our power. So never underestimate that, because when you really get to feel what's going on in your body and then what they tell you matches, that is like this beautiful sparkly space where now, okay, I understand that, right? And so it's
Yeah.
the next level of your learning, really.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, before we run out of time, I always
Yeah.
ask my guests if they have a favorite mantra or a golden nugget that they can share for anyone, that's on a healing journey.
Yep, I do. So I have a statement, and it's kind of like, those, are there shirts that you can wear inside out? And they're two different shirts. It's kind of like that. So
Yeah.
there's two statements, but they kind of plug into each other. So mine is clarity creates confidence, and confidence creates clarity. And for me, I feel like that is one of the areas of our health and wellness that we could really step into that power. Because when we have clarity, when someone is speaking to us and they can say, it's this and it's this and it's this, and you can either do this or this or this, right? Now I have clarity and I have confidence to actually carry that out. If I have no idea why somebody asked me to, sit on a cooch ball, or why someone asked me to, go stand on the ground for 5 minutes in the morning, I'm probably not
Yeah.
going to do it. But as soon as I can connect the dots and I know that this is a deposit into my wellness bank account, and when I need to make a withdrawal, I'm going to be good. Like when my kids all have the flu and I really need to like step in and make sure that I stay healthy, I've got this big bank account full of these wellness deposits. And so clarity creates confidence, and confidence creates clarity. And I say that one every single day.
It's beautiful.
Thank
It
you.
really makes sense. It makes sense.
Hmm.
Like the more clarity you have, the more confident you feel, and the more confidence you have, you'll have clarity.
Well, you will. And guess what will happen? The people around you are going to start to notice it. They will,
Yeah.
right? It's an energy, it's a frequency that we give off. And, the more people who are excited about, why do I have that headache, right? Like have a curiosity about it versus like,
Yep.
oh my God, another headache. That's where, this shift into natural healing. And like you said, getting out into nature, getting out, away from those fluorescent lights and into natural light. You breathe, you breathe a little bit and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I really feel different.
Yeah.
That is where the magic happens.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jana. And before you go, can you remind our listeners where they can get in touch with you if they wanted to
Hmm.
work with you? And, obviously everything will be in the show notes, but go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So on all the socials, just at jana.danielson. My website is bloombetter.life, and that's where you can, get in touch with me, see what I'm doing, and yeah, would love to connect. I just think what you're doing here, Fatima, is amazing. So thank you for allowing me to come share your platform and my message.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And if you're still here until the end, stay rebellious. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please click the subscribe button, share it with others, post about it in social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me or suggest topics, you can follow me on Instagram at Fatima Pagtakhan or at The Wellness Rebel Show. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.